Welcome to Monday Evenings with the Maestro. My name is John Devlin, and I'm the music director of the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra. On tonight's episode, we're going to preview our upcoming SoundBites 3 concert, a global celebration. To that end, I'm excited to interview Michael Ellis Ingram, a great friend and colleague whose edition of the Chavalier de Saint-Georges Violin Concerto in C we will be performing. I will also be speaking with two of our principal players from the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra, Barbara O'Brien on flute and Fran Duffy on harp. They are going to be the featured soloists on Japanese composer Toru Takemitsu's Towards the C2, a wonderful double concerto for their two instruments. I'm looking forward to all of these conversations, so let's dive right in and enjoy this episode of Monday Evening with the Maestro. I am not sure I've ever been more excited to welcome a guest to our little video session here than I am to introduce the Wheeling community to my best friend, Michael Ellis Ingram, who is a conductor now in the northern part of Germany. But we connected when we were graduate students together at the University of Maryland, starting way back in 2008. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, John. It's a great privilege and a pleasure to take part in this.
And it is not uncommon for us around this time every single week to have a discussion about music and philosophy and life, because we have Skyped for 1 hour every single week since you moved to Germany. And this feels very healthy to finally be able to collaborate on a project like this one together.
Yeah, we'll let the Wheeling community in on our secret weekly talks.
And we have some photographic evidence above my right shoulder here, because you can see that there is an enormous poster that I created for you as a graduation gift that has remained in my possession the whole time, because you said, I love you, Johannes, as you call me, but I'm not taking that thing with me to Germany. So
I'm gonna pick it up. I promise, one of these days.
So upcoming on January 17th, we have round 2 of trying to get this concert to happen, where we are going to feature an arrangement that you've created, a new edition of a piece by a composer that lived during the latter half of the 18th century in Europe named Chavalier de Saint-Georges. Can you let us know a little bit about this composer and his legacy?
Yeah, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, also known as Joseph Boulogne, lived 1745 to 1799. He was a Black Frenchman with roots in the Caribbean. And he was an extraordinary Renaissance man. He was a musician, he was a composer, he was a violinist. He was an impresario. He owned and controlled his own orchestra and commissioned things. He commissioned, for example, the Paris symphonies of Haydn and led the debut performances of those. But he was also a legendary fencing master and a man of great military prowess. So he could do virtually anything, and he was one of the most prominent and talked about men in and around Paris during his day.
Right. And we decided that this was a composer worth getting to know much better. And one of the things that we discussed over the last number of months was how to better integrate composers whose voices should be heard on our stages that weren't getting the recognition they deserved as far as performances go. And when we decided to program one of his pieces, a short 3-movement violin concerto for strings only in the back, the price was astronomical through the current owner of those copyrights, for a composer that died, over 200 years ago. So we thought that that was a problem, because it should be affordable and easily accessible to perform the works of someone like Chevalier de Saint-Georges. So can you talk about the project that we embarked upon together and how we hope it is the beginning and model of a possible solution for our industry?
Well, I have to say I've admired your programming for years because of its diversity, and so often you've programmed entire seasons where none of the concerts, or put it another way, your seasons always include people of color and female composers and living composers, and not as a specialty or a novelty or a special program, but that's just the way you work on every single program, and that's stunning and has moved me and inspired me over the years. And that's the orchestra of the future. That's how orchestras should be programming. Um, And so I enjoyed looking at your original programming for this season, which of course has been modified in many ways. But you shared it with me over a year ago, I think. And so I was quite excited about it. And then in the summer, you told me this problem with the publisher, and I that made me really upset, and I couldn't sleep for 2 days over it. It just really stuck in my mind. I thought this cannot be that a composer like Chevalier de Saint Georges is being canceled just because of a publisher who's charging too much for his music. And the reason that's happening is because there hasn't been enough interest in his music over the past centuries. Because most composers of that era, composers who are better known, like Mozart, they are represented by dozens, if not hundreds of publishers. And there are options for pieces by Mozart at every price range, from free to very, very expensive, brand new special editions. But a composer like Chevalier de Saint Georges, his music is really only available from one publisher. And that really got under my skin. So I spent some time doing the research, and um, Google is not much help when it comes to finding where the manuscripts are, but there are sort of musicological versions of Google where you can really you can even play the first notes of a piece and search through all of the libraries, archives, museums of the world. And so I managed to locate the original manuscript parts of the piece that you wanted to perform. They just happened to be in Munich, Germany. Now I passed through Munich, which is, so I live far in the north of Germany. Munich is far in the south. I passed through Munich virtually every summer, but this summer obviously I didn't, and it didn't seem advisable to make the trip. So I spent a couple of days locating the manuscripts, and then I spent a day telephoning with a series of lovely Bavarian librarians who seemed very happy to to talk with a real life person.
That sounds like
And
something
so,
from The Music Man, right? The Bavarian librarians.
yeah, and they were so helpful and so gracious in confirming, yes, that is the piece you want, what state is it in, what kind of things are available. And yeah, so they sent me facsimiles of the parts, and I went from there. And of course, at that time, Chevalier de Saint Georges would not have been conducting with a baton and reading from a full orchestral score with all the parts.
Mm.
He would have been playing the violin solo. And so there was no orchestral score. And this is true of many pieces by many composers from that era. So I had basically a stack of parts, violin, viola, and so forth. And so I using my computer software, entered all of those parts, created a score, and then went about editing things and making what I like to call a performance edition, which basically means that if you put it on the stand of a musician, they can play it. Critical editions are often far more expensive, and they're designed for people who are doing research, and you want to know the history of every single little dot and dash in the piece. And it's very useful for researchers, but not necessarily for performers. So I wanted to create an edition for performers, and one that would be affordable to anyone who wants to do this music, because it's too beautiful to be ignored, and it should not be too costly to perform. I just don't. I'm not okay with that.
Right. And that's one of the beautiful outcomes of this project. Not only will the Wheeling Symphony be able to perform this work in its new version that you've created that is explicitly meant for high quality orchestras to be able to perform on a reasonable schedule, but also it will become available afterwards because the work itself is in the public domain to any orchestra at a price that you're going to decide, which I doubt is going to be a bank breaker for any orchestra that pings you to perform the edition. Now, it humbles me to hear your response to the type of programming that I've tried to champion. We know why it's important to program living composers, American composers, diverse composers. And Chevalier du Saint Georges, of course, is not living or American, but certainly comes from a history of diversity. But one of the things that I think must go hand in hand with a imperative to program diversely is also that you're still seeking out music of the finest quality. And I think one thing that struck both of us is that this piece is of the highest quality. It is spontaneous feeling. It has a style that will mirror that of Mozart because it was that of the time. But you and I were both very compelled by some of the things that he's doing beyond what Mozart would, especially in the violin solo, ask to be done, and in some of the way that the form is integrated throughout this traditionally three movement concertos. So can you tell me, kind of as a wrapping up question here, what are some of the things that struck you musically as you touched every single note in this piece?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I did touch every single note multiple times, and every slur and every dot and every dash. Yeah, the first thing that jumps out at you is the range. The violin soloist is sometimes playing way up in the stratosphere, an octave or more above any other concertos that I know from the time period. And that suggests just, even though it was sort of the same stylistic era, the classical era, it's clearly a different school of violin playing, and there were clearly different priorities um, that were informing Chevalier Saint Georges' style of composing. Um, yeah, it's such a well balanced piece. There's sort of a meaty yet joyous first movement. The slow movement is very deeply tragic and melancholy,
Mm.
and then the final movement has this sort of lightness and bounce in its step. And it's a rondo with a very catchy tune you'll be whistling on your way out of the theater or out of your living room if you're watching at home.
And that I think is exactly what I take from it, that it is a version of the traditional concerto first, second, and third movement that will be recognizable, but that within the little twists and turns and the way the melodic construction happens, you can tell that this is a musician of the highest order, one that necessarily not should or could, but must be placed next to Mozart for careful inspection, because we need to know more of the voices that were coming out of these different eras, and an orchestra like Wheeling, under the type of thinking that as an organization we're doing right now, wants to be a champion of that. So we are proud to have teamed up with you on the first of what I think will be many projects that have a similar end. And we are so excited that you have taken the time to introduce yourself to us through this type of interview. And we're just as excited to be introduced to your musical imagination in the way that we hear this piece performed on January 17th.
Thank you. I am so excited for the concert. I will be popping popcorn.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you, Michael. And we look forward again to that concert. And thank you for having joined us on Monday Evenings with the Maestro. I am so excited to be here previewing our upcoming SoundBites concert that features two of our outstanding principal players from within the orchestra. You can see Fran Duffy, who is our principal harpist, and Barbara O'Brien, who is our principal flute player. And we are going to be embarking on a journey together, even if it only lasts one day, aren't we? Because we're going to be performing this wonderful double concerto by the Japanese composer Toru Takemitsu, who is one of the most profound voices in our artistic landscape of the 20th century. He died in just 1996, and the piece that we're going to perform is called Towards the Sea from 1981. And this is one of several versions of this piece. We're going to be performing the one that's the second version for harp, alto, flute, and string orchestra. And Fran, why don't we start off with you and give us a little bit of a sense of what this piece means to you? I think you have some experience with it previously.
Yes, I have performed Toward the Sea 3, which is the third version of it. And in that version, it's a duet for just alto, flute, and harp. And in that particular version, I guess the harp is pretty much covering everything that in our version would include the string parts. So it was actually quite a challenge. It's my first introduction to the piece. And I believe that it's much closer to the original version, which is for guitar.
Right.
And it was quite a challenge. But what I really loved about playing the piece was it was very gestural, and it was it evoked vision in people's minds of being on the sea, of the place where Cape Cod is in Massachusetts, and it was just very the idea of it being sort of little sweeping gestures of sound that could evoke such a picture in people's minds was really interesting to me. I mean, it did it for me too. We would have a little bit of something that kind of swept somewhere and then went up or down. You could feel yourself on a boat on the ocean.
Mm.
That really was what made it an intriguing piece to play. And to try and evoke that for the listener was a challenge, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you've mentioned how evocative this piece is, and what's not obvious from the title is that there is a direct, familiar literary connection with this piece to Herman Melville's Moby Dick. There are three movements in the piece. The first is called The Night. The second is actually called Moby Dick, and as you mentioned, the third is called Cape Cod. So, Barb, why don't you let us know a little bit about what you think maybe each of these movements mean, and how the flute part, which is something that Takemitsu uses as a prominent voice in so many of his pieces, what this means to you.
Well, when I was reading about him, I thought it was very interesting that he was very interested in water. He was very enamored by water, and most of his music was based on some type of water, several pieces. And the one that we are doing, the Moby Dick, was actually based on the Herman Melville Moby Dick story. But I had also gone to the museum in Cape Cod for whales. So I saw a lot of interesting things there. And my boyfriend's family has a home in Cape Cod. So we have a home that has what's called a belvedere. It's called Beautiful Vista, and it points out to the Cape. And the water at night is just calm. It's very dark. And as the sun sets on it, the colors are just like out of this world.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the day goes on, the color of the light and everything changes constantly. And he was very, I think, also interested in Debussy. So he was into the impressionistic thing, but he wanted to bring in his own sort of cultural thing from the Japanese culture into this. And I thought, and he was also untrained. He had very little formal training as a composer, which I thought was interesting. And so when you asked me to play it, I immediately went out and searched on YouTube for a recording, because I thought, alto flute, oh my God, And so I listened to it and I thought, this is incredible. But I thought, can I do this? I mean, I rarely play the alto. I mean, as a principal flute player.
Right.
So I had no experience with the piece. But what I did was I listened to this was Joshua Bell's version of it with the Cleveland Symphony. And I would put my headphones on and crank the music up, because it was very difficult otherwise to play over it. And I just played along with him because it was so hard to count. I mean, he loves multiple, rhythms and all, and, from conducting it, it's not the easiest thing to do, to change every measure. I was like, well, how are we going to get this together? But I really enjoyed working on it. I played it a lot, and my alto was kind of, I had a really old $1,500 alto. And when my boyfriend heard that I was going to play this piece, he said, look, let's just get you a good, good alto. And so I got a brand new alto, thank God, because the difference in sound was just incredible. This was like butter, and that was like a tank.
Well, we are looking forward to hearing the buttery version. You mentioned Takemitsu's captivation with the idea of the sea, and in German, the spelling of the notes E flat, E natural, A natural forms the motive that spells the word sea. And it's actually used not only in this piece, but in many of his other works. And one of the companion pieces on this program is Shostakovich's Eighth String Quartet, the orchestration that we'll be performing, where he weaves the DSCH theme throughout, which is kind of his personal identifier within music. So we're working with two composers that actually connect these works with the bigger landscape. So I thought maybe it'd be interesting, and Fran, why don't we go back to you to talk about this piece in particular, and Barb, you had already mentioned how difficult it is to put together, because both versions 1 and 3 are meant to be done without a conductor and are actually written without bar lines. It's just up to the solo players to navigate the synchronicity together. So what is it going to be like, Fran? I mean, anytime you perform a piece as a soloist in front of the orchestra, but particularly something like this that's going to rely so much on the interwovenness between your two solo parts.
Well, first of all, I bought myself a score,
Yes.
and I plan on playing off the score because otherwise, I think it will be very challenging to keep this together. Takemitsu wrote other pieces for flute and harp and for flute, viol, and harp. I'm sure he was very well aware of the Debussy Trio Sonata for flute, viol, and harp. And So his music is part of our canon for flute, viola, and harp trio. So and whenever we play chamber music, whenever I'm with a flutist or with a flutist and the violist or other combinations, I always have the score in front of me. I always have the other parts. The flutist doesn't usually, the violist doesn't usually, they just have their one line, but I'm always reading off a score so I can see how things line up. If somebody gets off, I know exactly where they are. And I feel very out of control. I have a part that's not the score, that is very helpful in studying the piece and preparing. Right. But when it comes to actually playing the piece, having the score in front of me, I think will be very helpful for all of us. And because Barb, there's no way, I've seen the flute part, there's no way she can play off the score. So if I have it and you have it, John, I think we'll be able to keep it together. It's going to be a little different because I'm not used to playing this piece with bar lines and with beats and a conductor, but I actually think it will be easier that way. And of course, the other thing will be that I don't have to play as many notes because the string players will be there and I get to play all the accompaniment. But I am looking forward to playing it with the score in front of me and seeing how things line up. And that way, I think we will be able to pull it together and have it be very much more cohesive in a much quicker time frame. But one of the things that I thought when I played it the last time with just as the duo was that I wish we had taken more time between some of the gestures of these little bursts of sound. And and maybe with the bar lines, the way they're worked out, it looks like that kind of problem is solved. Right. That Takemitsu has written that time into the piece with the bar lines and with the time signatures that he's kind of using. Instead of writing 15 seconds, it's actually measured out. So that 15 seconds will be closer to a real 15 seconds, as opposed to when we're playing and oh, that must be 15 seconds. Let's go on. And you don't get that feeling, that sense of space that I think this kind of music really needs to have plenty of space. There's a lot of music in the silence between the gestures and in the held notes and the long time between the gestures of music that make it much more effective.
Yeah, you've mentioned what I think is a very singular element of this piece, which is that I don't know if I've ever conducted a piece that retroactively had the conducting meters imposed upon it. And I will admit that the piece is 12, 13 minutes long. This is the most difficult conducting challenge I have faced in my career. And I think that one might be prone to exaggeration, but here I think you'll believe me, because have you ever had a conductor send you a 4-page Microsoft Word document with how every single bar is going to be conducted? Because frankly, it's not intuitive. We never see things like 1.5/8 or 13/16, and the type of ways that he's navigated these challenges are certainly just guidelines rather than thinking about the way a conductor would normally function gesturally to help the music. So we, I think, are going to be well prepared going into the day where we rehearse and perform this, because we've thought it through together in so many different ways here. But I'm certainly looking forward to the challenge, but it definitely is just that, a challenge.
Yes.
And so, Barb, you mentioned that you're going to be using this special instrument, the alto flute, on this performance, because that's what the composer calls for. Can you let our audience know a little bit about the difference between the regular C flute and the alto flute, and how you think that that's going to impact the sound world that you live in for this piece?
Okay, so first of all, the alto flute is in a different key. It's in G. I think it's fourth lower, and it's very big. Which I had to get a special curved head joint for because of my hands, and it keeps it closer together. Otherwise I'm down here and I can barely reach the keys because I'm so small. And a lot more air is needed to perform on this instrument. It's lower than the lowest of the flute unless you go up in the upper register. And sometimes the long notes that Mr. Bell held forever, I'm just like song and a prayer, hoping it's not so long that I can hold it, because it takes a massive amount of air. It's like playing a tuba for me.
Mhm.
And so this instrument has a very velvety, warm sound. It's hard to hear. I just did an opera with it. I was kind of disappointed because it was a huge alto solo with a one singer and 6 other players, and unfortunately the miking wasn't set up properly, and so you heard piano and you heard strings and you heard everything but the alto flute, and then the voice was so loud. I may as well have been, in another country. So that's one of my concerns is, I'm glad that it's a small orchestration, but how much will they actually hear of me unless, we're mic'd or whatever. But yeah, it's a beautiful instrument, and the color, it's perfect for this piece, and especially in the third movement. It's very interesting. The second movement, and the first, they're slower. There's long stretches of just me holding and dying for air as it tapers off, and supposedly I'm to go longer. And I too did not buy a score. What I did buy and only could find for the flute was a flute guitar version. So when Gail sent me the actual flute part, I almost had a heart attack because I was like, oh, there's nothing to hold on to. So I took my part, I sent it to Gail, and she wrote in everything, all the conducting things, everything. And then even though it's guitar, I wrote in where the strings were, where the harp was, which parts were what, because I was dependent on what I was seeing. Even though I was listening to string orchestra, I was watching the guitar part and following.
Right.
Which is perfect for me, because then, without a score, I can still watch.
And I think it's a beautiful insight into what we as the performers go through in preparation, because we have to come to the first rehearsal with all of this mapped out completely, because especially during these COVID times, we have one day, sometimes one rehearsal, to put these things together that can be extraordinarily complicated. But I do enjoy the opportunity that the forced reduction of the ensemble size has put us into, because we can do things like this that would probably never find their way onto the main stage at the Capitol when we have the full orchestra at our disposal. So I love the exploratory opportunities that this time has offered to us. And it really gives us a beautiful opportunity also to collaborate with each other as the principal members of the orchestra. There are 3 of our principals or soloists on this program, including Rachel Stegeman, our concertmaster. And I know our entire community is looking forward to our second attempt at putting this concert on in just a few weeks. So thank you, Fran, and thank you, Barb. Our entire audience here at the WSO is looking forward to hearing you both perform.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you all for having joined us for Monday Evenings with the Maestro. I want to thank Michael Ellis Ingram, Barbara O'Brien, and Fran Duffy for having joined me tonight. We have an exciting program that not only includes the pieces we've described already, but also Astor Piazzolla's Tango No. 2 and Dmitri Shostakovich's hauntingly beautiful String Quartet No. 8 arranged for string orchestra. Not only do we have an incredible musical program for you, but we also have an exciting culinary menu that Chef Thomas Raymond has created. We cannot wait to take you on this global celebration, and tickets are still on sale by calling our offices at 304-232-6191. We hope you'll join us on Sunday, January 17th at Ogilvy for this dynamic performance. Once again, I am John Devlin, and we are the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra, your community in concert. Thank you.